That was the moment she realized the stranger holding her future was never a stranger at all. The wind cuts sharply between the tall glass buildings of downtown Chicago, sending a flurry of loose papers spiraling across the crowded sidewalk like startled birds. Sophie Carter freezes for half a second, her breath catching as she watches a man stumble awkwardly near the curb, his arms failing to contain the chaos of documents slipping through his fingers. People pass by without slowing, eyes down, shoulders tight against the cold, but Sophie does not move on. She rushes forward, kneeling on the concrete, gathering page after page before they can disappear into the street. The man crouches beside her, slightly out of breath, murmuring a quiet thank you, his voice steady, but his movements oddly uncoordinated, almost too careless for someone dressed so simply yet with quiet confidence. Sophie hands him a stack, her fingers brushing the edge of a page, and then she stops. Her name is printed there. Her resume. The exact same formatting, the same carefully chosen words she had rewritten countless times at her small kitchen table late at night. Her heart skips, confusion flashing across her face as she looks up at him. But he simply takes the paper, his expression unreadable, as if this moment is not as impossible as it feels. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Sophie pulls her hand back slowly, her mind racing as the city noise fades into a distant hum. How does he have this? She remembers dropping off copies earlier that morning at a corporate building 3 blocks away, her last attempt after weeks of rejection emails and polite dismissals. She had been on her way to what she hoped would be her first real interview in months when she saw him struggling. Now she stands there, staring at the man who seems completely unfazed, as if holding her resume is the most natural thing in the world. He gathers the remaining papers, straightens them with deliberate care this time, and offers a small, almost knowing smile. You dropped this, he says, but his tone suggests something deeper, something she cannot quite place. Sophie hesitates, her instincts pulling in opposite directions. Walk away, forget this, focus on surviving the day, or stay and ask the question burning in her chest. The cold air presses against her skin, grounding her in the moment, and she realizes something unsettling. This encounter does not feel random. It feels like the beginning of something she cannot control, something already set in motion long before those papers ever touch the ground. The moment stretches just a second too long, and Sophie feels it, that quiet shift in the air that makes everything around her seem slightly unreal. She takes a small step back, her fingers tightening around the thin strap of her bag as she looks at the man again. Really looks this time. There is nothing flashy about him. No expensive watch catching the light. No polished suit screaming status. Just a simple dark coat and calm eyes that seem to notice more than they should. That is what unsettles her the most. You said I dropped it, she finally says, her voice careful, steady, but her chest feels tight like something important is slipping just out of reach. I did not drop that here. The man tilts his head slightly, as if considering her words, then glances down at the resume in his hand before looking back at her. Maybe not here, he replies, his tone even almost thoughtful, but people lose things in more ways than one. The answer does not make sense, and yet it does not feel like a joke. It feels intentional. Sophie swallows, her mind racing through the morning. She remembers standing in the lobby of that tall glass building, handing her resume to a distracted receptionist who barely looked up, remembers walking out with that familiar sinking feeling that she had already been forgotten. So how did it end up with him? Her eyes narrow slightly. Did you take this from the building on Madison Avenue? She asks, a hint of accusation slipping through despite herself. For a brief second, something flickers in his expression, not guilt, not surprise, something closer to recognition. Then it is gone. I found it where it needed to be found, he says, handing the paper back to her, but his fingers linger just a fraction longer than necessary, as if reluctant to let go. Sophie takes it slowly, her heart beating faster now, not from fear, but from the strange sense that this moment matters more than it should. Around them, the city continues moving, car horns echoing down the street, footsteps rushing past, but the space between them feels oddly still. You should be somewhere, he adds gently, his eyes drifting to the clock above a nearby storefront. Sophie follows his gaze, and her stomach drops. The interview. She is late. Not just a few minutes, but enough to make a difference. A sharp wave of frustration hits her. Not at him, but at herself. She had needed that chance. She still does. She starts, then stops, shaking her head as reality settles in. It does not matter now. The opportunity is gone. The man studies her quietly, as if weighing something unseen. Most people would have kept walking, he says after a moment. You did not. Sophie lets out a soft breath, almost a laugh, though there is no humor in it. Yeah, well, that does not exactly pay the rent, she replies, the edge in her voice slipping out before she can stop it. For the first time, a faint smile touches his lips, not amused but understanding. Not everything valuable shows up right away, he says. She looks at him, searching for sarcasm, for anything that would make this feel normal, but there is none. Just that calm certainty that makes her uneasy. Who are you? She asks, the question coming out quieter than she expects. He does not answer immediately. Instead, he reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a small, simple card, holding it between his fingers for a moment before handing it to her. Sophie takes it, glancing down, but the information on it is minimal, just a name, Daniel Hayes, and a number, nothing more, no company, no title. Her confusion deepens. That is not helpful, she says, looking back up at him. It will be, he replies, his voice steady, as if he knows something she does not. Then, without another word, he steps back, merging into the flow of people moving down the sidewalk, leaving Sophie standing there with a resume in one hand and a card that raises more questions than answers in the other. She watches him disappear into the crowd, her pulse still unsteady, her thoughts tangled. The cold wind brushes past her again, but this time she barely feels it. Slowly, she looks down at the resume, then at the card, and something shifts inside. Her. The interview may be gone, but something else has just begun, and for reasons she cannot explain, it feels far more important than the opportunity she just lost. The card feels heavier than it should as Sophie turns it over between her fingers, standing alone on the sidewalk long after Daniel disappears into the crowd. The city noise slowly returns, louder now, sharper, like reality snapping back into place. A bus rumbles past, splashing cold water near the curb, and she finally exhales, blinking as if waking up. It hits her again. The interview is gone. Completely gone. Sophie presses her lips together, folding the resume carefully and slipping it back in her bag, though the gesture feels almost pointless now. She had spent weeks preparing for that moment, rehearsing answers in the mirror of her tiny apartment, ironing the only decent blouse she owned, timing her route down to the minute so nothing would go wrong. And still, everything had gone wrong. Not because she failed, not because she was not good enough, but because she stopped to help someone who dropped a stack of papers. The irony stings. She lets out a breath that turns into a quiet laugh, though it carries no humor, only exhaustion. Figures, she mutters under her breath as she starts walking, her steps slower now, aimless. The cold air bites through her coat, but she barely notices. Her mind keeps replaying the moment. His voice, his calm, the way he looked at her like he already knew something about her she had not said out loud. People lose things in more ways than one. What did that even mean? By the time Sophie reaches her apartment building, the sky has turned a dull gray, the kind that makes everything feel smaller. The hallway smells faintly of stale cooking and old carpet, and a flickering light above the stairs buzzes as she climbs up to the second floor. She reaches her door, hesitates for a second, then pushes it open. The room is exactly as she left it. Small, quiet, temporary. A single bed against the wall, a narrow table covered in papers and coffee rings, and a window that looks out onto the back of another building. It has never really felt like home, just a place to survive between attempts at something better. Sophie drops her bag onto the chair and sits on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing for a long moment. Then she reaches into her pocket and pulls out the card again. Daniel Hayes. No company. No title. Just a name and a number. It does not make sense. Nothing about today makes sense. Her phone sits on the table, screen dark, silent. No missed calls. No messages. No second chances. She picks it up anyway, turning it over in her hand as doubt creeps in. People like him do not just appear out of nowhere and hand you a card for no reason. Or maybe they do, and she is reading too much into it because she has nothing else left to hold on to. Sophie leans back against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment, but instead of rest, she sees it again, the resume in his hand, the slight pause before he gave it back, like he was deciding something. Her eyes open. Something shifts. Slowly, she sits up straighter, her fingers tightening around the card. What if that moment was not random? What if losing the interview was not the end of the day, but the beginning of something else? The thought feels dangerous, almost foolish, but it refuses to leave. She stands, pacing the small room once, twice, her heartbeat picking up again, not from fear this time, but from possibility. Finally, she stops in front of the table, staring at her phone. If this is nothing, then she loses nothing. She's already at zero. But if it is something, Sophie inhales deeply, then exhales slowly, steadying herself. Her thumb hovers over the screen as she types in the number from the card, each digit feeling like a step into the unknown. For a second, she hesitates, doubt whispering that this could be a mistake, that she is chasing something that is not real. Then she remembers his words. Not everything valuable shows up right away. Her jaw tightens slightly, resolve replacing hesitation. She presses call. The line rings once, twice. On the third ring, it connects. A calm voice answers, the same voice that has been echoing in her mind since the street. I was wondering how long it would take, he says. Sophie freezes, her breath catching again. But this time, it is not confusion that fills her chest. It is the unmistakable feeling that whatever she just stepped into, there is no turning back now. The silence on the line lasts just long enough to make Sophie question whether she should say anything at all, but her voice finds its way out anyway, steady at first, then edged with uncertainty. How did you know it was me? She asks, her fingers tightening slightly around the phone as she stands in the middle of her small apartment, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the walls. On the other end, Daniel lets out a quiet breath, not surprised, not rushed, as if he has been expecting this exact moment to unfold. Because you are the kind of person who does not walk away, he says simply. The answer lands heavier than she expects. Sophie frowns, pacing once across the room, her mind still trying to catch up. That does not explain how you had my resume. She presses, her tone sharper now, more grounded, like she's pulling herself back into control. He says. Sophie waits, her heart beating louder in her chest, but he does not immediately continue. The pause stretches, building tension she cannot explain. Then he adds, I needed to see something that does not show up on paper. The words settle into the space between them, and suddenly, the chaos of the afternoon begins to form a pattern. Sophie leans against the edge of the table, her mind racing. You're testing people, she says, not accusing this time, just stating what feels increasingly obvious. Not people, Daniel corrects gently. You. The word hits differently. Not random. Not coincidence. Intentional. Sophie closes her eyes for a brief second, processing that. Out of everyone on that street, he was watching her. Waiting. The thought sends a strange mix of unease and curiosity through her. Why me? She asks quietly. This time, the answer comes without hesitation. Because you stopped, he says. You were already late. I could see it in the way you kept checking the time, the way you hesitated before you knelt down. Most people would have kept walking. You did not. Sophie opens her eyes, staring at the floor as his words replay in her mind. He noticed that. All of it. She swallows, her voice softer now. And what does that prove? She asks. On the other end, Daniel shifts slightly, and for the first time, there's a hint of something more personal in his tone. It proves that you make decisions based on who you are, not just what you need, he says. And that matters more than anything on that resume. The room feels quieter now, the weight of the conversation pressing in. Sophie glances down at the resume, still resting on the table. The line she had crafted so carefully suddenly feeling small compared to what he is talking about. "So what now?" she asks after a moment, her voice steadier, but carrying a quiet edge of anticipation she cannot hide. The line goes silent for a brief moment, and Sophie realizes she is holding her breath again. This time, however, it is not from confusion or doubt. It is from the unmistakable feeling that whatever happened on that street was only the first move in a much bigger game, and she has just been invited to step inside it. Sleep does not come easily that night. Sophie lies on her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of streetlights slipping through the blinds and casting soft lines across the room. Every time she closes her eyes, she sees the same moment again, the papers scattering across the sidewalk, his calm expression, the way he said her name without ever asking for it. By the time her alarm finally goes off, it feels like she never truly rested. The sound cuts through the silence, sharp and unforgiving. 7 o'clock. Sophie sits up slowly, her body heavy, but her mind already racing ahead. Today is different. It has to be. She moves quickly, almost mechanically, reaching for the one outfit she owns that still carries a sense of professionalism. A simple blouse, carefully pressed the night before, dark pants that fit just well enough, and a coat that does its job even if it has seen better days. She stands in front of the small mirror, adjusting her collar, smoothing her hair, studying her reflection with a critical eye. "You get one chance," she whispers to herself. "Do not waste it." The words linger as she grabs her bag and steps out into the cold morning air. The city feels sharper today, louder somehow, every sound amplified by the tension sitting in her chest. The walk to Madison Avenue feels shorter than usual, her steps quick, purposeful, driven by something stronger than fear. When she finally reaches the building, she stops for just a second at the entrance, looking up at the tall glass structure that had rejected her just one day ago. Yesterday, she walked out of here feeling invisible. Today, she is walking back in with a name. Daniel Hayes. The lobby is exactly as she remembers. Polished floors, quiet conversations, the low hum of professionalism that makes everything feel distant and controlled. The receptionist looks up briefly as Sophie approaches, her expression neutral, almost dismissive. "Can I help you?" she asks. Sophie straightens slightly, grounding herself. Before speaking, "I am here to see Daniel Hayes," she says, her voice steady despite the nerves pressing against her ribs. The change is immediate. The receptionist's posture shifts, her expression sharpening with recognition. One moment, Sophie is just another job seeker. The next, something else. "Of course," she says quickly, reaching for the phone. "One moment, please." Sophie stands there, trying not to overthink the shift she just witnessed, but it is impossible not to notice. Within seconds, a well-dressed man appears from a hallway beyond the reception desk. His movements are precise, confident, his eyes scanning the room before landing directly on her. "Miss Carter," he says, offering a polite nod. "This way, please." Sophie follows him, her footsteps echoing softly against the floor as they move deeper into the building. Each step feels like crossing into a world she has only ever seen from the outside. Glass walls, quiet offices, people moving with purpose, all of it carefully ordered, controlled. It is a different reality from the one she has been living in. They stop in front of a conference room. Curiosity. Daniel nods once, as if confirming something only he understands. "Yes," he replies. "And today, we find out if you were meant to walk away yesterday, or if you're meant to walk in here instead." The words settle into the room, and Sophie feels it again, that shift, that quiet sense that whatever happens next will not just change her job situation. It will change everything. For a moment, the room feels too quiet, like the air itself is waiting for something to happen. "To know how you think when there is no script," he says, "because what you did yesterday cannot be taught." Sophie feels the words settle somewhere deeper than she expects. She crosses her arms lightly, not defensive, but grounding herself. "And if I had kept walking," she asks, Daniel does not hesitate. Then you would not be sitting here, he replies. The honesty in his voice is almost unsettling. No sugar quating. No corporate politeness. Just a clear line between two different outcomes. Sophie lets out a slow breath, processing that. So this is all based on one moment, she says. Daniel shakes his head slightly. Not just the moment, he corrects. The choice behind it. There is a difference. He pauses, then continues, his voice softer, but more focused. Anyone can do the right thing when it is easy. You did it when it cost you something. Sophie looks down briefly, the memory of the missed interview still fresh, the frustration still real. It cost me more than something, she says quietly. Daniel nods, acknowledging it without dismissing it. I know, he says, and that is exactly why it matters. The room falls quiet again, but this time it feels different, less uncertain, more intentional. Sophie straightens slightly, her focus sharpening. Okay, she says. Then ask me what you need to ask. Daniel studies her for a moment, as if confirming that she is ready. Then he leans forward slightly, his tone shifting just enough to signal that this is where things begin to matter. If you were given responsibility here, real responsibility, he says, what would you do differently from everyone else who has sat in that chair? Sophie does not answer immediately. Not because she does not have one, but because she understands the weight behind the question. This is not about the right answer. It is about the real one. She exhales slowly, her mind moving through everything she has experienced, everything she has lacked, everything she has learned the hard way. Then she looks up, meeting his gaze directly, her voice steady, grounded in something deeper than preparation. I would not forget what it feels like to need this, she says. Daniel does not react immediately, but something shifts in his expression, subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. And in that moment, Sophie realizes this is no longer about proving she deserved a job. It is about proving she understands something most people in this building have already forgotten. Daniel does not look away after her answer, and that is what makes the moment feel heavier than anything that has come before. Most interviews end with a nod, a polite acknowledgement, a quick shift to the next question, but this is different. He studies her like he is measuring something that cannot be written down, something that cannot be taught. Sophie holds his gaze, refusing to shrink under the silence, even as her heart beats harder against her ribs. Then, slowly, Daniel leans back in his chair, his fingers tapping once against the table before going still. That is exactly the problem, he says. Sophie blinks, caught slightly off guard. What is she asks? Daniel gestures lightly toward the glass walls beyond the conference room, where employees move with quiet efficiency, their conversations muted, their expressions focused. People forget, he says. They forget what it feels like to struggle, to wait, to be overlooked. And when they forget, they start making decisions that look good on paper but fail in real life. Sophie follows his gaze, watching the controlled rhythm of the office outside. It feels distant, almost unreal compared to the life she has been living. Then why build a company like this, she asks, turning back to him. Why create something that disconnects people from reality? Daniel's expression shifts slightly, not defensive, but honest in a way that is rare in rooms like this. Because scale changes things, he says. Growth brings distance. Systems replace people. And over time, the original reason you started gets buried under everything you had to build to survive. His words are calm, but there is weight behind them, something personal. Sophie studies him more closely now, noticing the subtle tension in his posture, the way his voice lowers just slightly when he speaks about the past. You sound like you have seen that happen, she says. Daniel lets out a quiet breath, almost a half smile, though it does not quite reach his eyes. I have, he replies. More than once. The room falls into a brief silence again, but this time it feels like a shared understanding rather than uncertainty. Sophie shifts slightly in her seat, her curiosity growing stronger than her hesitation. So what are you looking for, she asks. Not just to me, but here. Daniel leans forward again, his focus returning fully to her. Someone who does not forget, he says. Someone who will question decisions instead of just following them. Someone who understands that numbers represent people, not just outcomes. Sophie absorbs that, her mind connecting it to everything she has experienced over the past year, every rejection, every overlooked application, every moment where she felt like she was just another line in a system that did not see her. "And you think that is me?" she says quietly. Daniel does not answer right away. Instead, he reaches into the folder and pulls out her resume again, placing it between them on the table. Then he slides it slightly closer to her. "I think you have the potential to be that person," he says. But potential is not enough. Sophie's eyes narrow slightly, her focus sharpening again. "Then what is?" she asks. Daniel's tone becomes more direct, more grounded. "Action," he says. "Consistency. The ability to choose the harder path more than once. Not just when someone is watching." Sophie leans back slightly, crossing her arms again, but this time it is not defensive. It is thoughtful. "You mean this is not over?" she says. Daniel shakes his head once. "This is just the beginning," he replies. He stands then, moving toward the door, his movements calm but purposeful. Sophie watches him, her pulse picking up again as the tension in the room shifts into something more active, more immediate. He opens the door, then turns back to her. "There is a team working on a client issue 2 floors up," he says. "They have been stuck for 2 days. I want you to sit with them. Observe. Ask questions. Do not try to impress anyone. Just understand what is happening." Sophie stands slowly, her instincts kicking in, the uncertainty now mixing with a quiet determination. "And then what?" she asks. Daniel holds her gaze for a moment, his expression steady, but there is a faint hint of something else there now, something that was not present before. "Interest. We see what you do with what you learn," he says. Sophie nods once, not fully sure what she is stepping into, but certain that walking away is no longer an option. As she steps past him and into the hallway, the world of the company no longer feels distant. It feels immediate, alive, and filled with expectations she cannot yet see. And somewhere behind her, Daniel watches her go, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone who may have just changed the direction of something much bigger than either of them expected. Sophie steps into the elevator with a quiet breath, the doors sliding shut behind her as the noise of the main floor fades into a low hum. For a brief moment, she is alone, surrounded by mirrored walls that reflect her image from every angle. She catches her own eyes in the reflection, steady but alert, and something in her posture shifts. This is no longer about surviving the day. This is about proving she belongs in a place that was never designed for someone like her. The elevator dings softly as it reaches the next floor, and when the doors open, the atmosphere feels different immediately. The energy here is tighter, more strained, like something unresolved is hanging in the air. Voices overlap from down the hallway, sharper, more frustrated than the calm professionalism she saw earlier. Sophie steps out, following the sound until she reaches a glass-enclosed workspace where a small group is gathered around a table scattered with documents, laptops, and half-finished cups of coffee. No one notices her at first. That alone tells her everything she needs to know about how serious the situation is. She pauses at the edge, observing just like Daniel instructed. A man in his late 30s is speaking quickly, his tone controlled but clearly strained, pointing at a chart on the screen. "We have already adjusted the projections twice," he says, his voice tight. "If we move it again, the client is going to think we have no idea what we're doing." A woman across from him shakes her head, frustration clear in her expression. "The projections are not the problem," she replies. "The assumptions behind them are. We are building a strategy on numbers that do not reflect reality." Sophie's eyes move between them, listening carefully, her instincts starting to piece things together. Numbers versus reality. It feels familiar in a way she cannot fully explain. She takes a small step closer, still unnoticed, her attention drawn to the screen. Charts, growth curves, forecast models. Through his hair, exhaling sharply. "We do not have time to rebuild the entire model," he says. "The client meeting is tomorrow morning." Sophie feels the tension tighten in the room. Tomorrow. The word lands heavily. She knows that kind of pressure, the kind that forces decisions before understanding. One of the analysts glances up then, finally noticing her standing there. His brow furrows slightly. "Can we help you?" he asks, his tone polite but guarded. Sophie straightens instinctively, aware of how out of place she must look. "I was asked to observe," she says carefully. "Daniel Hayes sent me." The reaction is immediate. Subtle, but unmistakable. The further you get from what is actually happening, the silence deepens, but it is no longer dismissive. It is thinking. And for the first time since she stepped into the building, Sophie feels it clearly. She is no longer just observing the system. She is beginning to challenge it. The silence that follows her words feels heavier than anything Sophie has experienced since stepping into the building. For a brief second, no one moves, no one speaks, and the tension in the room shifts from frustration to something sharper, something more focused. She does not have an answer, but because she understands the weight of what she is about to say, had not fully realized until now. This was never just about a job. This was about whether she could hold on to who she is in a place that constantly tries to reshape people into something easier to manage. And for the first time since she walked into the building, she knows the answer. The energy in the room continues to shift long after Sophie steps back, but she no longer feels like an outsider standing at the edge. But not low enough. "Do we even know who she is?" he murmurs. The response comes just as quietly. "Someone Hayes pulled in, probably trying to prove a point." Sophie hears enough, says. Sophie blinks, caught off guard. "Good," she repeats. Daniel steps a little closer, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment feel more personal, more deliberate. "If everyone is comfortable with you, you're not changing anything," he says. "To clarify something before you move forward." The room stills again, not welcoming but listening. The woman across the table watches her closely now, curiosity returning beneath the tension. Sophie places her hand lightly on the edge of the table, grounding herself in the moment. "You are about to call the client with a new approach," she continues, her voice steady, not loud, but firm enough to hold attention. "But you are still assuming they will accept uncertainty the way you frame it." The man frowns slightly. "We already discussed that," he says. Sophie shakes her head gently. "You discussed being honest," she replies. "But you did not discuss how to make them feel understood. That is different." The distinction lands quietly, but it changes the direction of the room again. Sophie continues, her thoughts flowing more clearly now, shaped by experience rather than theory. "If you tell them you need to ask more questions, they hear doubt," she says. "But if you show them you understand what they are struggling with before you ask anything, then those questions feel like solutions, not delays." The woman leans forward slightly, her expression sharpening. "Go on," she says. Sophie nods, stepping just a little closer to the screen. "Right now, your model tells you something is off," she says, "but they already know that. They are living it. What they need is for you to say it out loud in a way that proves you see it from their side." The room is completely silent now, every person focused on her. Sophie glances briefly at the data, then back at them. "Start the call by describing their situation better than they can," she says. "Then ask your questions, not as a correction, but as a partnership." The man exhales slowly, his resistance softening into consideration. "That changes the tone completely," he says quietly. Sophie nods once. "Exactly," she replies. "You are not fixing the numbers. You are rebuilding trust. That is the real problem. The shift is immediate, but this time it is deeper than before. Not just a new plan, but a new understanding of the plan itself." The woman sits back slightly, a small, thoughtful smile appearing for the first time. "That is the missing piece," she says. The analyst who had whispered earlier now looks at Sophie again, but the suspicion in his expression has been replaced with something more complex. Respect mixed with surprise. The man at the head of the table nods once, decisive now. "All right," he says, "solving problems, but changing how people experience being part of the solution." When the call finally ends, the room is quiet again, but this time it is not heavy. It is satisfied. The man leans back in his chair, exhaling slowly, a small smile breaking through for the first time. That went better than expected, he admits. The woman nods, glancing towards Sophie with a look that carries both gratitude and something deeper. That changed everything, she says. Sophie does not respond immediately. She simply nods, her attention still processing what just happened, not just the outcome, but the process that led there. She realizes something important in that moment. This is not about being the smartest person in the room. It is about seeing what others overlook and having the courage to say it out loud. The door opens quietly, and Daniel steps inside. The room shifts again, more subtly this time, as the presence of authority returns. But now, it feels different to Sophie. Less distant, more connected. Daniel looks around the room, his eyes moving from one person to another before settling briefly on Sophie. Then he speaks, his voice calm but clear. "I heard the call," he says. The team straightens slightly, instinctively attentive. Daniel nods once, acknowledging the work. "That is the standard we aim for," he continues. "Not perfection, not control, understanding." The words land with quiet authority. The man at the head of the table nods, this time without hesitation. "Understood," he replies. Daniel's gaze shifts back to Sophie, holding there just a second longer than necessary. Then he turns slightly toward the rest of the team. "I want to make something clear," he says. "What happened here today did not come from a new model or a revised strategy. It came from a different perspective." He pauses, allowing the statement to settle. And that perspective came from someone who has not forgotten what it feels like to be on the other side of those numbers. The room goes still again, but this time, the attention is directed fully at Sophie, not with doubt, but with acknowledgement. Daniel steps closer to the table, his tone steady, but carrying more weight now. "That is the kind of thinking we need more of here," he says. "Not just today, but moving forward." Sophie feels the shift fully now, not just in the room, but within herself. This is no longer about proving she deserves to be here. She has already done that. The question now is what she will choose to do with that opportunity. Daniel turns back to her directly. "Walk with me," he says. Sophie stands, her movements calm, but her pulse steady and strong, no longer driven by uncertainty, but by something more grounded. As she follows him out into the hallway, the door closes behind them, separating the noise of the room from what comes next. They walk in silence for a few steps, the rhythm of their footsteps echoing softly. Then Daniel stops, turning to face her fully. "You did not just pass a test today," he says. "You changed the outcome of it." Sophie holds his gaze, her expression steady, but there's a quiet question behind it. "So what does that mean?" she asks. Daniel's answer comes without hesitation. "It means you are no longer here to prove anything," he says. "You are here because you belong here." The words settle deeper than anything she has heard all day. Not because they are comforting, but because they feel earned. And for the first time in a long time, Sophie allows herself to believe it. The hallway feels quieter than before, but this time it is not filled with doubt or uncertainty. It is filled with something steady, something earned. Sophie walks beside Daniel, her steps no longer hesitant, her posture no longer guarded. There's a quiet confidence in the way she moves now. Not because everything is certain, but because she has already faced the hardest part and did not step back. They stop near a large window overlooking the city, the skyline stretching out in sharp lines of glass and steel, a reminder of how big the world is and how small one moment can feel until it changes everything. Daniel reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a familiar sheet of paper, slightly worn at the edges, the same resume that once scattered across the street. He holds it for a moment before handing it back to her. Sophie takes it slowly, her fingers brushing against the paper, recognizing every crease, every imperfection. "You kept it the whole time," she says quietly. Daniel nods once. "Because that was the moment everything changed," he replies. Sophie looks down at it, then back up at him, her expression thoughtful. "For you or for me?" she asks. A faint smile touches his lips, not distant, not guarded, but real. "For both of us," he says. The answer settles between them, simple but undeniable. Sophie exhales softly, glancing out at the city again. Yesterday, she was just trying to get through the day, trying to hold on to something that felt like it was slipping away. Today, she is standing in a place she never thought she belonged, holding proof that sometimes the smallest decisions carry the greatest weight. "I almost did not stop," she admits after a moment. Daniel studies her, his expression steady. "But you did," he says. "And that is the only part that matters." The words do not feel like praise. They feel like truth. Sophie nods slowly, absorbing that, then folds the resume carefully, not as something fragile, but as something meaningful. "So what happens now?" she asks. Daniel does not hesitate. "Now you help make sure no one else gets overlooked the way you almost were," he says. "Not just in hiring, but in every decision we make." The responsibility in his voice is clear, but so is the trust. Sophie feels it, not as pressure, but as purpose. She meets his gaze, her voice steady, grounded in everything she has learned in just one day. "Then I am not here to follow the system," she says. "I am here to challenge it when it forgets people." Daniel nods once, a quiet approval in his expression. "Exactly," he replies. For a moment, neither of them speaks, but the silence is no longer uncertain. It is complete. Sophie turns slightly toward the elevator, then pauses, looking back at him. "Why did you really do it?" she asks. "Not the test. The way you set it up." Daniel considers the question, then answers with the same honesty he has carried all along. "Because I needed to know if someone like you still exists," he says. "Someone who chooses to care, even when it costs them something." Sophie holds his gaze, the weight of that answer settling in. "And now you know," she says. Daniel's expression softens just slightly. "Now I do," he replies. The elevator doors open with a soft chime, and Sophie steps inside, turning once more before the doors close. The city outside has not changed. The challenges ahead have not disappeared. But something inside her has shifted permanently. She is no longer waiting for an opportunity to be given to her. She has already stepped into one. As the door slides shut, the reflection in the mirrored surface shows someone different from the woman who stood there that morning. Not because her circumstances changed overnight, but because she did not walk away when it mattered most. And somewhere behind her, Daniel remains by the window, watching the city with a quiet certainty. The system will not change overnight. But today it moved, because one person stopped, chose differently, and refused to forget what it feels like to be unseen. And that is how everything begins.